Hello everyone, and welcome back to Deep Chronicles World. I usually don't say anything at the start of these compilations, but hit me up for the next 15 seconds. Most of you aren't getting my notifications anymore. Can you please check if you're still subbed? YouTube has been turning it off for a bunch of people, so you might want to check that. All right, then back to the spooks. Have a good night from all those heist videos I used to make. In 1980, the residents of the area woke up to the sound of a very loud scream and the screeching of a car braking. Everyone rushed out of their homes to see what had happened, only to be shocked by the sight of a 12-year-old boy named Frank lying in front of them, drenched in blood after being hit by a neighbor's car. The neighbor had also broken the boy's bicycle, but that wasn't the real problem. The real issue was that the boy who died, Frank, was the son of the most notorious mafia boss, so feared that he was known as the butcher of the mafia. So, what exactly happened? Let's continue the story. It all began on October 27, 1940, when John Gotti was born in America as the fifth of 13 siblings in a poor family. With so many children, life was incredibly tough, and it was almost inevitable that the kids would end up on the streets of New York. And that's exactly what happened. When John Gotti reached his teenage years, he decided to run away from his family and seek his fortune in the streets of New York. Naturally, he was always looking for quick gains, and the only skills he had were his ability to run fast and the knife he always carried, which he used to threaten people and steal their money. But he had another hobby: stealing cars and trucks. He would go to the road, stop cars or trucks, and threaten the drivers until he stole their vehicles and fled. Despite being a teenager, he was incredibly bold, as we'll see in the upcoming details. The problem was that he didn't care about any punches or stabs he delivered to anyone who refused to obey his orders, till one day something happened that would change the course of his life. While John was stealing, he noticed another thief was also at work. Both were doing their job, but John realized the other thief was with his gang. However, John, as you know, was fearless. When the second thief ordered him to hand over everything he had stolen, John didn't care at all. A fight broke out between the two, each wielding their knives. John wasn't concerned about the rest of the gang with the second thief. Even if they ganged up on him, he didn't care. One of the gang members approached the two, but they were surprised when the gang stopped the fight and took both of them to their boss. John was shocked to discover that the person he was fighting was a member of a very powerful gang in America, the Gambino family, which was considered one of the top 5 mafia families in the world at the time. In fact, the origins of these 5 families were Italian, as many Italians were immigrating to America during that period. But with the influx of gangs and criminals from Italy, crime began to rise in the streets of New York and America in general. This led to the 5 mafia families forming a committee called the Commission, organized by the godfather of the mafia, Lucky Luciano, whom I talked about in a previous video on the channel. After the commission was formed, all criminal operations became coordinated, especially among the 5 Italian mafia families, the most famous of which was the Gambino family. The Gambino family had started their mafia operations back in Italy in 1910, and since then, their influence had grown, with their gang expanding to over 1,000 members spread across various locations outside of Italy. The gang continued to grow, and people began to fear them more and more. The gang's members were everywhere, infiltrating every organization and project in the country. The Gambino family had power, weapons, and influence to the point where they could turn America's streets into a bloodbath, all while making millions and billions of dollars. And now, standing before them was the teenage John Gotti, who had just fought with one of their members. As you might expect, a teenager like John, with no one to back him up, had just fought and injured a member of one of the biggest Italian mafia families in America. His fate seemed sealed. Death, too. But something strange happened. Della Croce, the boss of the Gambino family, noticed everything that had happened and saw John's skills in stealing. He offered John two choices, with no third option. John's decision would determine the rest of his life: either die now or have his life completely changed. Della Croce gave him two options: either be killed on the spot or be given a task. If he succeeded, Della Croce would consider him his son from that day forward. Literally, he offered to make John his son and give him power, influence, and become his right-hand man in the most powerful mafia family in America. It's worth noting that to join the mafia, one had to complete a difficult task, whether it was a robbery or a murder. Failure was not an option, as it would result in death. So, what was the task Della Croce gave to the teenage John? At the time, Della Croce's nephew and close friend had been killed by an Irish mafia gang. This gang was very powerful, and they knew all of Della Croce's men. For such a sensitive mission, Della Croce needed someone new to the mafia, someone whose face wasn't known in their world. That's why he gave the task to John Gotti, asking him to go and kill the man who had killed his nephew. This all happened in 1973, and it was considered the first operation in the life of the future mafia boss, John Gotti. With all his boldness, John took a gun with him to carry out the mission. But the strange thing was that he refused to take anyone with him. He wanted to do it alone. After that, he began hunting the son of the Irish mafia boss. His name was James. John waited outside a restaurant until James came out drunk and unaware of anything. John then took him to a remote location where he shot him 6 times, ensuring his life was over. The problem was that there were eyewitnesses who saw him carrying out the operation. He was accused and arrested, but no one could prove the murder charge. He was only convicted of theft, as he admitted to stealing, but nothing more. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. But thanks to the power and influence of Della Croce, he was released after only 2 years. From then on, a new chapter began in the life of John Gotti, the new member of the Gambino family in New York. He was only 20 years old at the time. Della Croce was impressed with John's personality, even though John often broke the gang's rules and orders. To Della Croce, John was like honey to his heart, and he always defended him. John didn't waste this opportunity. Instead, he began to flaunt it in front of everyone, walking around with bodyguards and drawing attention wherever he went. People looked at him as if he were a famous celebrity, but everyone knew he was John Gotti, the right-hand man of the Gambino family boss. Every time he went out, he dressed in the most luxurious clothes, and photographers would rush to take his picture and interview him. He loved the attention, as it made him appear as the official spokesperson for the Gambino family. However, this would later create many enemies within the gang itself. Many people began to resent him for how quickly he had risen to power and become so close to the boss, taking on such a high position as the right-hand man. Others felt they were more deserving of that role. Additionally, his constant interactions with the media, acting as the official spokesperson, or even as the boss himself, began to irritate many of the older members of the gang. When Della Croce, the boss of the Gambino family, held meetings, he did so in his large house, which he called the White House. He did this to show off his power, even suggesting that he was stronger than the President of the United States himself. The house was heavily guarded, and Della Croce made sure that any business conducted in the country had to go through him, with the share of the profits going to him, whether willingly or by force. This allowed him to make billions of dollars annually. However, the 5 mafia families had established a new system called the Commission, led by Lucky Luciano, the head of the mafia. This system made drug trafficking off limits for the Gambino family, as it was the business of 2 other mafia families. But as I mentioned earlier, John Gotti began to break the rules more than ever, especially regarding drug trafficking. He started dealing in secret, even though it was forbidden for his family. He began building his own drug business, making secret profits. However, this wouldn't be easy, especially since it was prohibited for the entire family. When the secret leaked to other members of the gang, they immediately reported it to the boss. Della Croce quickly summoned John and warned him to stop, speaking to him calmly and kindly, since he was his right-hand man. John began to slow down his drug operations, making them even more secretive than before. Meanwhile, he started working on another skill he had always loved: stealing cars. But this time, he did it with even more boldness and strength. Now that he had the power, he did. He no longer settled for simple street fights. Instead, he sought brutal revenge against anyone who crossed him, even going as far as cutting their flesh into pieces. No one dared to speak against him, despite his charming appearance and stylish clothing. Inside, he was a terrifying killer. However, this didn't stop him from having enemies who hated him deeply, like his neighbor, Fabi, who despised John, his wife, and his children. Fabi would often give them strange looks, which bothered John's wife so much that she asked John to teach him a lesson or make him stop. But John didn't care, as Fabi was just a neighbor and an ordinary person with no value to him. Until one day, a major disaster occurred that changed everything and further increased John's power, making everyone fear him even more. On March 12, 1980, John's 12-year-old son, Frank Gotti, was playing in the street in the morning when Fabi, the neighbor who hated the family, sped up his car and hit the poor boy who was riding his bicycle. The impact threw the boy forward, ending his life. Everyone woke up to the sound of the car's brakes and the boy's scream. People rushed out to see what had happened, and John and his wife came out to find their son dead on the street. Everyone began to mourn when they realized it was John Gotti's son. The strange thing was that Fabi, the neighbor, was terrified and kept apologizing, swearing it was an accident. So out of fear of John Gotti, he turned himself in to the police, knowing that he was as good as dead. No matter where he hid, John would hunt him down and take revenge. When the police asked John if he was accusing Fabi of killing his son, John surprisingly replied, "No, it was just an accident. My son died naturally." At this point, Fabi was certain he would die a horrible death and would be tortured until John took his revenge. Fabi lived in constant fear, always looking over his shoulder wherever he went. He even chose to eat in crowded public places so that he would be in front of people's eyes, making it harder for anyone to kill him. But he was still terrified, until one morning, John Gotti took his wife and traveled to Florida. Time passed, but his wife kept asking John to avenge their son. In reality, no one knew what was going on in John's mind. He only traveled after a month had passed since the incident to make people think he had moved on and forgotten about it. But in reality, his trip was just an excuse to be absent. One night, after Fabi had finally relaxed, thinking nothing would happen to him and even traveled to another country, John's gang kidnapped him. That was the last time anyone saw Mr. Fabi. The gang tortured him in every possible way, using guns, knives, and any other means of torture. In the end, after all the torture, Fabi's life ended and his body was dismembered and disappeared. In truth, no one knew what happened to him, whether he was alive or dead, or where he was. When his family realized he was missing, they reported it to the police, who questioned John about it. John simply said, "No, I was in Florida. I wasn't here." And with that, he continued his work as if nothing had happened. After avenging his son, he moved on, and his power, influence, and strength continued to grow. But as his power grew, so did his enemies, especially within the gang, where people resented the authority and strength he wielded. Until one day, something changed that turned everything upside down for John, and tensions began to rise within the gang. This all happened in 1982 when Della Croce, the boss of the Gambino family, died at 10. With his death, the protection and power that had been placed over John were removed. The big boss who had always defended him was gone. The problem was that the person appointed as the new boss of the gang after Della Croce was someone named Castellano, who had a personal grudge against John and hated him deeply. However, many people believed that John, who was more famous and powerful than Castellano, deserved to be the leader of the Gambino family. John had built his own business and power, and he was always the one appearing on TV, giving interviews and talking about how his gang was full of good people who followed the rules of the commission. He even claimed they punished those who broke the rules and caused trouble in the streets, making them seem like heroes who maintained peace. Throughout this time, John had built good relationships with important people and politicians. Unlike his relationship with the gang's boss, which was deteriorating, John often broke the rules and orders of Castellano, and his secret drug business not only caused problems with Castellano, but also with other mafia families. As you know, the business was divided among the families, and drug trafficking belonged to other mafia families. The next step was clear. One of the two had to eliminate the other to take control of the Gambino family. This step fell to the faster and more cunning person, who was none other than John Gotti. He quietly planned and coordinated everything in his mind, making this the step or leap to becoming the new boss of the Gambino family. How did he do it? On December 16, 1985, John sent 4 of his strongest men to wait outside the restaurant where Castellano, the boss of the Gambino family, was having dinner with a friend. After the friend left, Castellano got into his car to leave, but he was surprised to find his driver with him. In reality, his life ended right there. The crime shook the streets of New York. People were shocked to see the boss of the Gambino family lying in a pool of blood, along with his driver and their car, riddled with bullets. No one, not even the police, knew who had committed the crime, but the Gambino family knew very well that only John could have done it. The person who had just killed the boss of the Gambino family was someone who had a history of problems with him, and this step was expected by even the lowest members of the gang. A month later, after the funeral and mourning ceremonies for Castellano, John Gotti met with the other important members of the gang, the leaders, to appoint himself as the new boss. This happened because he had built friendships with the leaders by involving them in his drug business, which brought them gold. As for the other members of the gang who weren't convinced by John's words, they were convinced by his strength and weapons. In the same year, 1985, John Gotti was appointed as the boss of the largest mafia family in New York, the Gambino family. From there, his journey in the history of the mafia began, and he became very famous. People even nicknamed him the Dapper Don because of his always impeccable style and the bodyguards surrounding him wherever he went, to the point that anyone who wanted to take a picture with him or interview him had to first pay $3,000 to the gang. John continued to exercise his power, engaged in his drug business, and didn't care about anyone. But now, after what he had done to Castellano, he didn't consider that Castellano had been a close friend of the other 4 major mafia bosses in the commission. What John had done would have serious consequences later from the other mafia families, who refused to recognize him as the boss of the Gambino family after he killed their friend Castellano. They always said that before they could recognize him as the mafia boss, they needed to study the matter carefully. But in reality, they were plotting together to take revenge on John by killing him. The problem was that John was smart and always took hidden steps forward, and no one knew what he was thinking. The solution was to keep him under surveillance 24/7. The 4 bosses appointed someone named Anthony to plan and eliminate John. Anthony kept watching John, trying to figure out his next move and where he would go, till the right opportunity presented itself in 1986. Anthony found out that John would be going out with his deputy named Frank and driving Frank's car, which was parked under Frank's house. Anthony quickly grabbed a digital bomb from the storage and rushed to Frank's car, attaching the bomb underneath. But luckily for John, he hadn't yet gotten into the car. The person who got in was his deputy, Frank, and the car exploded in front of him. The police arrived and began investigating, wanting to know who had planted the bomb, but they didn't know. Although John was very upset about the death of his friend Frank, he knew that this was an assassination attempt targeting him, not Frank. He immediately thought that the 4 major mafia bosses were trying to take revenge on him for killing Castellano. So he began to plan and study all aspects of the situation. His main concern wasn't that he was now competing with the 4 major mafia bosses in New York. In reality, the situation could escalate into a war at any moment, with blood spilled everywhere, but he didn't care. What mattered to him was power and influence and remaining the boss. If he ignored the situation, it would be seen as a sign of weakness. So he began to confront them and seek revenge. But first, he needed to find the person who had bombed the car and take revenge for his friend. After a long search, he discovered that the person who had carried out the operation was a member of a gang called the Lucchese family, which was one of the 4 major mafia families. The person's name was Anthony, and John began to gather all the necessary information about him. He found out that Anthony was conducting illegal operations in secret to make money behind his gang's back. He always brought in other people to help him, like his cousin or friends. John's plan was to send his men to Anthony's cousin's house, threaten him, and make him call Anthony, telling him that there was a new operation and they needed to meet at a specific location to plan it. Of course, Anthony would come, feeling safe and happy, thinking he was about to carry out a new operation and make a lot of money. He went to the location his cousin had told him about, waiting in his car, eating ice cream, feeling happy. But instead of his cousin arriving, a black car pulled up beside him and several guns pointed at him from the windows. The gang inside the black car began shooting at him. Luckily, Anthony hid under the car's dashboard and miraculously survived the attack, taking 3 bullets in his body. After recovering, he knew that the people who had tried to kill him were members of the Gambino family who wanted to take revenge on him. Now, he also wanted revenge, but he needed the help of his gang. It seemed like a major war was coming. What happened next, and who would prevail in this bloody war? Let's continue. At this time, another force emerged that would change the dynamics. The power of the commission was considered nullified because crime was increasing in the streets, and its laws were no longer effective. Bombs began to explode in the streets, and many innocent people became victims. The police began to take action, trying to catch up and save the innocent people who were dying. They demanded interrogations of the most famous mafia bosses in America at the time, including the 5 most prominent bosses, one of whom was John Gotti. The situation was tense from all sides, but this didn't stop the mafia from bribing the police to make the investigations easier. However, this didn't work with all the police officers. At the same time, there were police officers who had previously been members of the mafia, and their primary loyalty was to the gangs they came from. 2 of these officers were named Sims and Paul, and they were members of the Lucchese family, the same gang Anthony belonged to. Anthony spoke to them and asked for their help in eliminating John and his men who had tried to kill him. Anthony began describing the person who had shot at him from the black car, and Sims and Paul were able to identify the person who turned out to be a strong member of John's gang named Hatton. Hatton was someone John relied on for special revenge and assassination missions. Anthony asked the corrupt police officers to investigate and find out where Hodel was. The police were able to locate him, and instead of summoning him, they kidnapped him and took him to Anthony, who began torturing him and interrogating him to confess the name of the person who had sent him to kill Anthony. After extensive torture, Hodel initially remained silent, but eventually confessed that John had sent him to kill Anthony and was planning to eliminate the entire Lucchese family. After learning this, Anthony ended Haddel's life with multiple gunshots, leaving him in a pool of blood. He then ordered Sims and Paul to carry out a new operation to take out John's new right-hand man, a man named Chico. The two officers used their authority as police officers, wearing their uniforms and driving their police car at night, following Chico's car. They followed him until they reached an empty road, where they turned on their sirens to pull him over under the pretext that he was speeding. Chico pulled over to the side, thinking they were real police officers, and rolled down his window to hand over his license. But as soon as the window was down, he was met with 3 gunshots to his head, leaving him in a pool of blood. The officers then drove away, but the problem was that they didn't notice the 3 eyewitnesses who had. I've seen everything that happened on the street that night. Connolly, the witnesses immediately went to the police and reported what they had seen. They even spoke to the press, and the news began to spread everywhere that the police were now considered useless and the mafia was in control of the country. The innocent citizens were terrified, feeling that no one could protect them after what had happened with the police. The situation began to spiral out of control, with protests breaking out among the people. At this point, John saw an opportunity to regain control after his reputation and power had taken a hit due to the ongoing events. After the protests began in the streets, John decided to make a surprising move. Seeing his popularity declining, he appeared before the people to reassure them, announcing that he was ready to make peace with the other mafia bosses. He declared that he was willing to give up his right to seek revenge for the person who had been killed, who was close to him, in exchange for the other bosses also giving up their claims, and for the situation to calm down between them. The test move was actually very clever because he announced it in front of everyone, putting the other bosses in a difficult position. If they refused, it would look bad for them, and they wouldn't be able to kill him after he had made such a public announcement. The second goal for John was to appear as the hero in front of everyone, showing that he still had great popularity. Additionally, many people had started to turn against him, and he wasn't ready to fight all of them at once. Therefore, he needed to calm the situation and make a small sacrifice, but no one knew the thoughts going on inside his mind. In reality, this move would lead to the downfall of all the mafia families. Okay, how did this happen after what John had done? He appeared before the people as a hero, but at the same time, the federal police were gathering the mafia bosses to begin interrogations about the crimes that had been committed. John was setting up other people, bribing them to confess to the crimes and exonerate him, making himself appear as the victimized hero in the midst of all this chaos. Meanwhile, the federal police saw him as a criminal and were trying to pin everything on him. Okay? But thanks to his sharp intelligence and brilliant plan, the federal police couldn't prove anything against him. He was the only one who walked out of the courtroom declaring his innocence, while the other bosses remained under investigation. When John left the courtroom, he did so in full style and elegance, with everyone taking his picture and requesting interviews. He was truly seen as a hero, but he refused most of the interview requests. The federal police were still trying to gather evidence to convict him, so they began monitoring his friends. John knew that all eyes would be on him for a while, which is why, after the investigation, he acted completely normal, going out to eat and appearing in public, knowing that people were definitely watching him. After some time, the federal police noticed that he was meeting with his gang at a specific restaurant. The problem was that this restaurant was located in a very poor neighborhood which didn't suit John Gotti's status. When the police realized that these meetings were happening repeatedly, they became convinced that something was going on in that small, poor restaurant. They decided to plant audio recording devices or spy equipment inside the restaurant to eavesdrop on the conversations between John and his gang, especially since they noticed that the gang met there every day. But the problem was that when they reviewed the recordings from the previous night, they were shocked to find that the voices were completely drowned out by the music playing in the background and the loud noise in the restaurant. Even when they tried to enhance the audio, they couldn't make out anything. This was a major problem because it was now impossible for them to record the gang's conversations at any time due to the music and noise in the restaurant. They needed to find a way to make the gang meet somewhere else. The federal police, who were monitoring the situation and trying to spy on the gang, began to think of a plan. They decided that as soon as the gang started gathering, they would create a disturbance or commotion in the restaurant to force the gang to move to another location where they could be monitored more easily. But they didn't need to do this because they discovered the real secret. The gang wasn't actually meeting in the restaurant. The restaurant was just a front, a gateway to a secret location where the gang held their meetings. This became clear when they noticed that every time the gang entered the restaurant, an old woman would come out of the two-story house next to the restaurant. After the gang left the restaurant, the woman would return to her house. The police then realized that the gang was using a secret passage from the restaurant to the house to hold their meetings. The old woman would come out only after the gang had gathered inside. The police began monitoring the old woman closely, and when they noticed that she had left the house to go shopping, a group of police officers quickly entered the house and installed listening devices in every room. This was the beginning of the end for John and his gang, as well as the other 5 mafia families. So, what happened next? The police waited for the next meeting to begin listening to the conversations that would send John to his doom. Not only was he talking about the crimes he had committed in the past, but he was also planning future operations against others. He even plotted revenge against the police themselves. He had no idea that they were listening to him at that very moment. Imagine one of the federal police officers hearing John say his name and that he wanted to cut his throat. After all the confessions recorded from John and his gang, it was enough to send him to prison for the rest of his life. In December 1989, John was arrested. But the strange thing was that when the police arrested him, he remained completely calm with an unnatural confidence. He even looked at the officer handcuffing him and said, "You won't be able to prove anything, and I'll be out soon." But when he went to court, he was shocked to find that the recordings of him talking with his gang were being played. The investigations continued for a year and a half, during which John denied all the charges against him, speaking with such confidence that he made others, including the police and the court, doubt his guilt. He even justified the brutal crimes he had committed, claiming he was defending the city and its innocent people, eliminating the evil ones. He made up stories and tales, but the recordings in the courtroom, which captured his voice talking about his crimes in such a brutal manner, and even wanting to kill a federal police officer, were enough to convict him. In the end, his close friends and gang members who had been arrested began to confess against him, and he also started confessing against the higher-ups in the mafia and the other bosses. In reality, as the saying goes, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. But at the same time, another disaster struck one of the 5 mafia families in 1991. The Brooklyn Massacre occurred, lasting 4 months and resulting in the deaths of 40 people in the streets of Brooklyn. This massacre was carried out by the Colombo family, one of the 5 mafia families, and it was all orchestrated by one person, John Gotti, after he had confessed against the other mafia bosses. The boss of the Colombo family was arrested, and the gang began fighting over who would become the new boss. The gang split into two factions, each supporting a different person, and the conflict led to killings in the streets of Brooklyn. When the police decided to arrest the entire gang, the two men fighting for leadership ended up killing each other. The police arrested one of them and began interrogating him, and he confessed against the others. Even when they arrested Anthony, he began confessing the names of the corrupt police officers he had been working with to carry out crimes for the mafia. For the 5 mafia bosses, each was sentenced to life in prison. The first among them was John Gotti, who tried to reduce his sentence by confessing against others and revealing secrets. But instead, 60 additional charges were added to his sentence for murder, kidnapping, and the crimes he had confessed to. In a final desperate attempt, John began to say that he wished he had chosen a better path in life. But it was clear that life had chosen his path for him from the moment he was born, poor among 13 siblings, struggling to survive. But as we often say, even if life chooses the path for you, it's up to you to walk it. John chose to continue down the path of brutality to the point where the death of his own son didn't make him reconsider his choices. Instead, he became even stronger and continued on this path until the end. John Gotti died in his prison cell alone after suffering from throat cancer for a long time without any treatment. It was as if he was paying for the crimes he had committed, the bodies he had dismembered, and the lives he had destroyed. And that's the story of one of the many tales of the mafia. Hey, if you're enjoying these stories as much as I love sharing them, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. The heists were always carried out in one of those ways, whether it was digging, threats, using explosives, or something else to break into a vault. But today's story is different. Today's story is about a barber who decided to pull off a heist in his own home without even unlocking a door. Without digging, without anything in, he stole $1 million. Our story begins in Chicago, USA, with a barber named William. Smart. William was a barber by day, but he had another job by night. He was a thief. Every time he'd steal from houses, car shops, or anything that came his way to make a mark. In the morning, he'd return to his barbershop. Even though he was famous and made a lot of money from his barbering, most of the time, he carried out these thefts alone. Occasionally, his brother would help him, especially for bigger jobs or when he wanted to rob a bank. After robbing several small banks in the city where they lived in Chicago, his brother suggested they use their experience to pull off a big heist somewhere a bit farther away. They sat down and started thinking about the conditions the ideal bank would need to meet for them to make a huge profit. They made a list of criteria and started searching for the perfect bank. Among the conditions, the bank had to have lacked security, not too high-tech, and hold a lot of money. They searched for a long time until they finally found the perfect bank for their operation, a bank that met all their criteria. After agreeing, the first thing they did was go to the bank and open an account there. At the same time, they rented a small safe deposit box, a locker in the middle of the vault, where the larger safe deposit boxes were. Naturally, they didn't use their real names or documents. They used fake identities to avoid being recognized. They made sure to act like big shots, always going to that vault, coming and going, getting to know the employees. They made it seem normal, so no one would suspect them when they came and went frequently. The operation began. The bank had all the specifications they wanted. After agreeing on the plan, the first thing they did was go to the bank and open an account there. At the same time, they rented a small safe deposit box, a locker in the middle of the vault, where the larger safe deposit boxes were. Naturally, they didn't use their real names or documents. They used fake identities to avoid being recognized. They made sure to act like big shots, always going to that vault, coming and going, getting to know the employees. They made it seem normal, so no one would suspect them when they came and went frequently. They even befriended the lady who always handled their safe deposit box, chatting with her, especially William's brother, who got along well with her. They needed to gain her sympathy and look for any vulnerabilities in the bank's security, or even in the human element, the employees. Over time, they noticed all the little details about the bank's security system, how it worked, and understood it well. Sometimes, the lady would repeat certain things to them, showing that the bank was safe and that there was nothing to fear. William and his brother considered the possibility that the vulnerability might come from the human factor and decided to use social engineering. They befriended the lady, gaining her trust, and planned to use her to help them rob the bank. The lady, who had grown close to them, even told William, "Don't worry about this bank. If we want to take money, we can just come after hours, or open the safe deposit box. The box won't open if you don't have the key or the code. Even if you have the key and the code, the box won't open until the next day. And on Saturdays, the service stops in the morning, so if you close the box, it won't open until Monday." She explained that to open the box, you needed 3 things: the key, the code, and the time. Without all 3, it was impossible to open the box. William and his brother realized that the bank didn't track who left the vault, only who entered. This was the vulnerability they would exploit. William and his brother began to execute their plan. They had gathered all the information they needed. The lady had given them all the details, and they knew exactly how to proceed. William's brother had even suggested that they use the safe deposit box to hide their tools for the heist. They started bringing in the materials, little by little, hiding them in the safe deposit box. The materials weren't too large because the box wasn't very big, but they managed to fit everything they needed. William had decided to stay in the vault for a long time, so he needed to find a way to solve the problem of hiding larger materials. He discovered that the vault had a false ceiling, and if he moved one of the panels, he could reach the space above and hide the larger tools and equipment there. He gathered everything he needed, and, like every time, his brother stayed outside the vault, waiting for him. William entered the vault, hid in the space above, and waited for the right moment to start the heist. He had all the tools and equipment he needed, and he was ready to stay there for 2 days if necessary. When he finally emerged, it was dark, and he had brought a flashlight to help him see during the operation. He began to work slowly and carefully, making sure not to damage the safe deposit boxes. He opened each box one by one, taking whatever he found, cash, gold, or anything valuable. He wasn't picky. He took everything he could, trying to maximize his haul without leaving any traces. Sometimes he'd find boxes with nothing but credit card statements, and he'd leave them alone. He felt like Robin Hood, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. He worked through the night, taking breaks to eat and rest. He had to stay calm and composed, even though at any moment someone could open the vault and find him. He spent the entire weekend in the vault, working tirelessly. By Sunday night, he had opened about 70 or 80 boxes and decided it was time to stop. He began to clean up, hiding all the evidence and returning everything to its place. He made sure that nothing looked out of order, and then he returned to his hiding spot to rest. On Monday morning, the bank opened as usual, and the lady who handled the safe deposit boxes came in. She opened the vault, and William waited for the right moment to make his escape. He had a small mirror on a stick that he used to check if anyone was in the vault. Once he confirmed that it was empty, he emerged from his hiding spot and made his way out. He had 4 bags of loot with him, and he left the bank unnoticed. He met up with his brother, who was waiting in the car, and they drove away. The operation was a success, and William had stolen over $1 million. It took a long time before the bank discovered the heist. One day, a customer tried to open their safe deposit box and found that the lock had been tampered with. They checked all the boxes, and found that many of them had been emptied. They called the police, who launched an investigation to find any evidence that could lead them to the culprit, but they found nothing, no fingerprints, no clues, nothing. The only thing they found was a watch that had been left in the false ceiling. It was the only piece of evidence they had, but it wasn't enough to solve the case. The investigation remained open for a long time. A year later, in Chicago, a man entered a bank and went up to the ceiling. A panel from the false ceiling fell, and the security guard noticed something moving. They called the police, who arrived and found William hiding in the ceiling. They didn't know he was the one behind the previous heist, but they noticed that the materials he had with him were similar to those used in the previous robbery. They also found the watch, which matched the one from the first heist. They realized that William was the same person who had attempted another bank robbery a month and a half earlier. They had found the same materials and the same tools in both cases. The police finally had enough evidence to connect William to the first heist. They brought him in for questioning, and he eventually confessed. He explained how he had carried out the first heist and where he had hidden the money. In the end, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Because of his actions, the laws regarding bank security in the United States were changed. Thus, it became illegal to have false ceilings in bank vaults, and the security measures were tightened. William's heist had a lasting impact on the banking industry. Hey, if you're enjoying these stories as much as I love sharing them, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. A notorious gang was terrorizing the city of Detroit, Michigan. This gang had a chilling modus operandi. They would break into homes dressed as police officers, complete with tactical gear and bulletproof vests. Their usual targets were the homes of drug dealers and rival gang members. When they stormed a house, the criminals inside would mistake them for real cops, so they wouldn't resist. Over time, the gang's operations grew more violent and brazen, eventually catching the attention of the FBI. The Bureau stepped in to uncover the identities of those behind this audacious gang, and what they discovered was far more shocking than anyone could have anticipated. The FBI wasn't sure at the time, were these just criminals disguised as cops, or were they actual corrupt police officers? This is a story of crime, deception, and a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. So buckle up, because this is a first-class police thriller filled with gripping twists, intense chases, and revelations that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Our story begins in the 1990s. In the heart of Detroit, Michigan, a city known for its dangerous neighborhoods where drug trafficking, violence, theft, and murder were rampant. Despite the efforts of local law enforcement, it was nearly impossible to completely eradicate these crimes due to the sheer number of gangs operating in the area. The best the police could do was try to keep things from spiraling out of control. But then, something unusual started happening. Homes were being broken into, seemingly at random, or at least that's how it appeared at first. However, police soon noticed a pattern. Many of the reports they received described a gang breaking into homes while dressed in police uniforms and tactical gear. One such incident occurred in February 1994. The gang targeted a house in an area known for drug trafficking. The residents were used to police raids, as law enforcement would occasionally storm the homes of drug dealers. The gang members, dressed in full police gear with vests labeled police, armed with heavy weapons and wearing masks, stormed the house, shouting, "We're the police. Get down. Don't move." The man inside, a drug dealer, initially refused to cooperate, thinking they were real cops. But when the gang members grew violent and even fired a shot near his head, he caved and showed them where he had hidden his money inside the couch cushions. The gang took the cash and fled, leaving the man in shock. It was only later that he realized they weren't real police and reported the incident. The real police arrived, took his statement, and noted the gang's description. They were puzzled because no official police operation had been authorized for that house. This was just one of many similar break-ins reported across Detroit. Almost every week, there were reports of a gang dressed as police storming homes, threatening residents at gunpoint, and stealing cash, valuables, and sometimes even drugs. Most of the targeted homes belonged to drug dealers, but not always. Sometimes, the gang would target ordinary people, including elderly individuals and women, treating them with the same brutality they showed to criminals. This gang wasn't noble. They weren't just targeting criminals, They were after money, and they didn't care who got hurt in the process. As the gang's operations escalated, the police realized they needed to form a special task force to handle the situation. This task force included detectives from the Detroit Police Department and agents from the FBI. Together, they began investigating the gang, trying to uncover their identities. Initially, the investigators noticed that the gang's methods closely resembled those of real police or SWAT teams. They weren't just wearing police uniforms, they were mimicking police tactics during their raids. This led the investigators to suspect that the gang might include former or corrupt police officers. However, after extensive research, they ruled out this possibility. Even corrupt cops would avoid such blatant and violent crimes to avoid drawing attention. The task force faced a major challenge. Most of the gang's victims were drug dealers or criminals themselves, making them reluctant to cooperate with the police. However, the investigators assured them that their only concern was taking down the gang, not prosecuting small-time drug dealers. Slowly, some of the victims began to share information, but it wasn't much. The gang members were extremely careful, leaving no trace behind and ensuring no one saw their faces. The break-ins continued, and the violence escalated. In one particularly disturbing incident, the gang broke into the home of an elderly woman, mistakenly thinking it was a drug dealer's house. They interrogated her, demanding to know where she hid her drugs and money, but she couldn't answer. They broke her arm before leaving her traumatized. In another case, they assaulted a mother and her daughter. These attacks on innocent people fueled the investigators' determination to bring the gang to justice. The task force considered the possibility that the gang members might be current or former police officers. Given their tactics, they investigated officers who had been dismissed for corruption or other offenses, especially those who had worked on drug-related cases. However, they found no evidence linking any officers to the gang. The investigators concluded that the gang was likely composed of career criminals with no ties to law enforcement. The breakthrough came on July 26, 1994, when the police received a report of a shootout. When they arrived, they found a man shot multiple times and lying on the ground. He was dressed in police gear, wearing a mask, and armed with a high-powered handgun capable of piercing bulletproof vests. The man, later identified as Dante Garrison, was rushed to the hospital. The investigators hoped he would survive, as he might be the key to unraveling the gang's operations. When Dante regained consciousness, he agreed to cooperate with the police in exchange for immunity. He revealed that he was a member of the gang and provided crucial information about its structure and operations. Dante explained that the gang was much larger than the investigators had initially thought, with around 30 members. However, only 4 to 8 members participated in each raid. The gang was led by 2 men, Obie Carter, the mastermind who planned the operations, and Andre Woods, the enforcer who led the raids. Andre was a violent man who enjoyed torturing his victims, especially women. The gang was highly organized, with members receiving equal shares of the loot from each raid to prevent internal conflicts. With Dante's help, the task force identified most of the gang members and began monitoring their activities. They also obtained wiretaps to listen in on the gang's conversations, gathering evidence to build a strong case. The investigators planned to arrest the gang members during one of their raids, catching them in the act. On November 11, 1994, the task force received word that the gang was planning a major operation. The police set up surveillance and followed the gang as they carried out their raid. However, when the police moved in to arrest them, the gang managed to escape in their van, leading to a high-speed chase through the streets of Detroit. During the chase, the gang members fired at the pursuing officers, who returned fire. In the chaos, one of the gang members, Obie Carter, was shot and killed. 2 others were arrested, while 3 managed to escape. The police later raided several of the gang's hideouts, recovering stolen goods, weapons, and police gear. With the evidence they had gathered, along with the confessions of the arrested gang members, the task force was able to arrest a total of 29 individuals. All were convicted and sentenced to prison, bringing an end to the gang's reign of terror. Remarkably, despite the violent confrontations, not a single police officer was injured during the operation. It seemed that the gang, for all their bravado, were only tough when facing unarmed civilians. When confronted by real law enforcement, they crumbled. And so, we come to the end of this gripping tale. Hey, if you're enjoying these stories as much as I love sharing them, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. In a time when laws were mere ink on paper and the streets held the true power, there whispered a name everyone knew but dared not speak aloud. A name that built an empire from nothing, an empire founded on blood, fear, and insatiable greed. Capone. Imagine a simple boy, his father, a humble Italian immigrant. They had no wealth, no status, yet this boy possessed an ambition that dwarfed the very streets he grew up in. An ambition that would etch his name into every alley, every speakeasy in Chicago. Al Capone wasn't just a mob boss. He was something far more cunning, far more dangerous. From the clandestine species peddling illicit liquor to the very pillars of power, the Palisade, the courts, everyone seemed to dance to his tune. But how did he ascend Tassac Heights? What was the secret that always kept him one step ahead? As they say, greed is a man's greatest enemy. Capone, who seemingly held everything within his grasp, suddenly found tables turning. Those he trusted betrayed him. The city that once hailed him as its king now hunted him relentlessly. His questing then becomes not just how Capone built his empire, but how it crumbled, and the price he paid for the life he led. This isn't just another gangster story, a mere chronicle of crimes and body counts. It's the story of a man who forget his own legend, only to become lost in his shadows. Prepare yourselves, for what you're about to hear is not just a story, but a testament to avarice, treachery, and the downfall of one of history's most notorious figures. But this is just the beginning. Many tales remain untold, secrets buried deep, and mysteries that boggled the mind. How did it all begin? Who aided his rise? And what ultimately led to his downfall? Stay with me, and you'll uncover the complete saga from the first bullet fired to his final days behind bars. Because what's to come is not just a story, but a puzzle. A reality more captivating than fiction. Once upon a time, laws were mere ink on paper, and the streets ruled supreme. There was a name everyone whispered, but no one dared to speak louder. Name that forged an empire out of nothing. An empire built on blood, fear, and greed. The name Capone. Picture this, a young boy, ordinary, the son of a simple Italian immigrant. They had no wealth, no status, but this boy had a dream far bigger than the streets he grew up in. A dream that would etch his name into every alley, every corner of Chicago. Capone wasn't just a gang leader. He was smarter, more dangerous than that dot from speakeasies, selling bootlegged liquor to the police and courts. Everyone worked for him. But how did he rise to such heights? What was the secret that always kept him one step ahead? They say greed is man's greatest enemy. Capone, who once had everything in his grasp, suddenly found the tables turning. Those he trusted betrayed him, and the city that once crowned him king now hunted him. But the question isn't just how Capone built his empire, it's how it crumbled. Matisse, what price did he pay to live this life? This isn't just the tale of an ordinary mob boss or a string of crimes in numbers. This is the story of a man who crafted his own legend with his hands and lost himself in it. Prepare yourselves, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a testament to greed, betrayal, and the fall of one of history's most dangerous men. But this is only the beginning. Okay. There are countless untold stories, secrets yet to surface, and mysteries beyond imagination. How did it all start? Who helped him? What led to his downfall? Stay with me as we unravel the full story from the first bullet to his final days behind bars. What's coming isn't just a tale, it's a riddle, a truth more dangerous than fiction. But before we begin, let me tell you, the narrator, and I'll guide you through every twist, every shadowy corner of this saga. If you love this kind of content and want me to keep going, I need your support. So hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and leave a like after the video. Now, let's dive into our story. Shall we take a trip back in time? Let's go to January 17th, 1899 in Brooklyn, New York. In that moment, a child was born, a small boy named Alphonse Gabriel Capone. He was just an ordinary kid, like any other. But who could have imagined that this boy would become one of the most feared and infamous mobsters in history? Let me paint you a picture of Capone's background. His family were Italian immigrants, specifically from Naples. His father was a barber, his mother a homemaker, and the family was poor. Imagine people who came to New York chasing the American dream, only to find a harsh life filled with hunger, violence, and crime at every corner. Capone attended a Catholic school, but he had a temper and no patience. They say that at 14, he hit his teacher. Why? Because the teacher humiliated him in front of the class. The school didn't forgive him and expelled him. From that moment, the streets became his real school. In the streets of Brooklyn, you didn't have many options, especially if you were poor. You either worked hard and lived on the edge, or you were drawn into the world of crime. Capone's first job was with small gangs, like the 5 Points Gang, which was notorious in New York at the time. He learned the basics from them: how to evade the police, how to intimidate people, how to earn their trust or eliminate them if necessary. Here, we need to imagine young Capone, sharp-witted but with no boundaries. Life wasn't easy for him, and these circumstances were the main reason he chose this path. Think about it. How could the life of a child born into a poor family in a harsh society turn him into a figure that all of America feared? The story is just beginning, and what's coming is even greater and more dangerous. Once the streets had spoken to Capone, it was time for him to take his first official step into the world of crime. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would separate the young boy from the mobster who would shake all of America. New York, at the time, was a city that never slept, not in its nightlife, nor in its crime. Capone was part of the 5 Points Gang, one of the most dangerous gangs in New York at the time. The gang was like a second school for him, teaching him everything: how to terrify people, how to control neighborhoods, how to enforce his own laws. But there was one thing that set Capone apart: his personality. He always wanted to be in control, the one everyone feared. This, of course, led to conflicts even within the gang itself. One day, Capone was working at a bar with Frankie Yale, a key figure in his life. Capone had a bad habit: he would make crude remarks about women. And then, the unexpected happened. Huge fight broke out between him and a man whose sister he had insulted. The fight ended with a deep scar on Capone's face, earning him the nickname Scarface. The strange thing about this story is that Capone always told people the scar was from World War I, even though he never served. But imagine that scar became a symbol of his power. Okay, people would think twice before crossing him when they saw it. Frankie Yale, the bar owner Capone worked for, wasn't just a boss, he was a mentor. He taught Capone how to assert his dominance, how to make fear his greatest weapon, and how to use violence as a tool. Frankie saw something different in Capone, a smart young man with no red lines, who knew how to seize every opportunity. And so, when Johnny Torrio, one of Chicago's top mobsters, saw Capone, he saw the perfect right-hand man. Johnny had a vision, and he needed someone who could work with a cold heart and handle the streets of Chicago. It was Torrio who invited Capone to move from New York to Chicago, and that's where the real story began. But let me tell you, something life in the world of crime is never free of betrayal. Even in the small gangs Capone worked with in New York, he faced problems. His strong, domineering personality didn't sit well with everyone, and people tried to betray him, to eliminate him before he grew too powerful. Okay? But as they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. This period in Capone's life was a phase of preparation and learning. He learned that trust must be given cautiously, and that to succeed in the world of crime, you always have to stay one step ahead. With the experience he gained in Johnny Torrio's invitation to move to Chicago, Capone was ready to begin the most dangerous chapter of his life, chapter that would make him a legend in every sense of the word. And at the same time as America was trying to clean up its act and curb corruption, the Prohibition Act of 1920 was passed, banning alcohol entirely. But instead of order, chaos erupted. America became a paradise for mobsters, and Capone saw his golden opportunity. He decided to enter the game with full force. The law was clear: producing, selling, or even transporting alcohol was completely banned. But what Americans didn't anticipate was that people weren't going to stop drinking. Alcohol was a part of everyone's life, from the working class to businessmen, even politicians. And that's where the game began. The government banned alcohol, the mob would supply it, and the profits were astronomical. Capone and Torrio built a massive network for bootlegging. Imagine secret factories, hidden warehouses in back alleys, trucks transporting alcohol right under the noses of the police. Capone didn't just smuggle alcohol, he controlled its production and distribution from the factory straight to the consumer. He had people everywhere, people to produce, people to transport, people to sell. And of course, all of this was under the protection of the mob. When Capone arrived in Chicago, the situation was already complicated. Gangs were fighting for control of the city, but with Johnny Torrio, Capone saw a chance to expand his empire. Chicago was the perfect city: a large population, plenty of money, and a corrupt government that took bribes. Over time, Capone became the #1 name in the city's underworld. The streets of Chicago were under his control. If you wanted to open a speakeasy or sell alcohol, you had to pay a tax to Capone. If you tried to work behind his back, the solution was simple: bullet, and the story ended. But of course, power doesn't come without enemies. And Capone's greatest rival was George Bugs Moran, the leader of a rival gang from Chicago's North Side. The rivalry between them was anything but peaceful. Street wars, assassinations, and bombings became a daily occurrence in Chicago. The tension between Capone and Moran reached its peak with the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre in 1929, which we'll delve into later. But the important thing here is that Capone was always one step ahead of his enemies. Capone wasn't just an ordinary mobster. He had a clear plan. If you wanted to be the leader, you had to buy everyone: the police, the courts, even politicians were in his pocket thanks to bribes. And let's not forget his network of informants who kept him informed of every move before it happened. The money he made from the alcohol trade was so vast that he controlled the entire market. If anyone tried to enter his territory, they either lost everything or ended up dead. In a very short time, Capone wasn't just a mob boss, he became a legend. People feared him, but at the same time, they were in awe of him. His life was full of contradictions, brutality and murder on one hand, generosity and support for the poor on the other. Chicago was his kingdom, and those who crossed him didn't live to tell the tale. But here, Capone entered a new phase of his life, one of absolute control. But as you know, every empire must eventually fall, and Capone's downfall was more dramatic than anyone could have imagined. In the heart of Chicago, Capone wasn't just a mob boss, he was the undisputed king. The entire city was under his control, its streets, its clubs, even its government. But, of course, power comes at a price, and that price was written in blood. Let me tell you, Capone wasn't just an ordinary mob boss. The man held Chicago in his grip from every angle. The alcohol trade, no one could sell without his permission. Gambling, you had to pay your share if you wanted to play. Even the stock market was under his control. Capone's empire was complete, and everyone had to work for him or pay the price. But despite his power, there was one enemy standing in his way: George Bugs Moran, the leader of the North Side Gang. Moran constantly challenged Capone and refused to bow to him, and so Capone decided to put an end to it. The end was bloody in every sense of the word. Let's talk about one of the most brutal crimes in the history of organized crime, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. This story alone encapsulates Capone's ruthlessness and criminal genius. It all started with a meticulous plan. Capone decided he needed to eliminate Moran and his gang in one fell swoop. The planning was devilish. Capone's men dressed as police officers and prepared to fake police cars. The goal was to ambush Moran and his men and wipe them out. On February 14, 1929, Moran's men were gathered in a garage on Chicago's north side. Suddenly, police cars entered, and Capone's men, disguised as officers, ordered Moran's men to line up against the wall. What followed was a massacre, devastating blow to Moran's gang. Capone's name was now on everyone's lips in America. The police, the press, even the federal government were all watching him. But the story wasn't all roses. With all this power, Capone began to face betrayal from within. Greed was the biggest problem. Everyone wanted a bigger piece of the pie. This forced Capone to eliminate some of his own men to maintain the loyalty of the rest. Imagine a man who had to fight his enemies outside while maintaining his grip inside. But despite all his crimes, Capone was a media genius. He presented himself to the public as a successful businessman, even donating to the poor and helping the needy. The press at the time dubbed him the Robin Hood of Chicago. But this was all a facade. The truth was that Capone was the leader of an empire built on blood and crime. Behind the scenes, everything was in his hands: bribes, murder, control. After the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Capone became public enemy number one. The police had no direct evidence against him, but the massacre exposed him to the world. And that's when the questions began. How would he maintain his empire under all this pressure? But what happened next would be the beginning of the fall of the Capone legend of fall, as powerful as his rise. But before we continue, a quick break. If you've made it this far, you must be enjoying the video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and now let's continue. Capone, the man all of America was talking about, wasn't just a ruthless mob boss. He also had a personal life full of intrigue, a strange mix of a cold-blooded criminal and a devoted husband, a professional killer and a Robin Hood in a Chicago version. Capone married May Coughlin in 1918. May was a simple girl with no ties to the world of crime. When she entered Capone's life, she became an essential part of it. She was the only person Capone could talk to about his worries, his fears of betrayal, and his limitless ambitions. Despite everything happening around the murder, betrayal their relationship endured. May was the clean face of the Capone family, keeping the media and neighbors away from any problems that might reveal the dark side of her husband. Capone lived by a principle: if you're the leader, everyone must see your authority. His lavish lifestyle was the talk of the town. Luxury cars no one could dream of at the time, massive mansions filled with every form of indulgence, and never-ending parties. His mansion in Miami was like paradise: huge swimming pools, gardens, and servants at every corner. Even the parties he threw were legendary, featuring the finest band, alcohol, and the most famous musicians of the time. But this opulence wasn't just for show, was also a way to display his power. When you saw all this wealth, you wouldn't dare cross someone like Capone. But what's even stranger is that Capone wasn't just a heartless mobster. He had a human side, or at least he tried to show it. In Chicago, the poor were suffering from a crushing economic crisis, and Capone saw an opportunity. He established soup kitchens for the poor, providing free meals to needy families. People saw him as a folk hero, someone who helped the little guy when the government ignored them. The press portrayed him as a great man, and some even claimed he saved their lives. But let me tell you the truth, all these donations were just a facade. Capone wanted to build a positive image, one that would make people forget he was the reason for the corruption and poverty they lived in. Capone was the living embodiment of duality. By day, he appeared as a well-dressed, smiling man who helped the poor and attended parties with the rich. But by night, he transformed into a dangerous criminal who had no problem ordering the deaths of dozens just to maintain his image. He had a strange ability to separate his public and private personas. When you saw him with his family, he seemed like an ordinary, manna-loving husband and father. But behind the scenes, he was planning the most heinous crimes. But despite his power, Capone had moments of weakness. He always feared betrayal, always worried that one day he would lose everything he had built. And this fear made him live in complete isolation, trusting no one, not even himself. In 1934, Capone was transferred to Alcatraz, the most infamous prison in the world. Alcatraz was different from any other prison. There was no special treatment, no bribes, no room for control. In Alcatraz, Capone became just a number. No one cared that he was once the king of Chicago. Teas passed slowly, and memories of his former life haunted him. Imagine a man who lived his entire life surrounded by luxury and power, now ending up in a cell like an ordinary man, stripped of all control. In his final days at Alcatraz, Capone could barely speak. He became completely isolated, living in a difficult psychological state. The man who once planned the greatest crimes could now barely utter a few words. Capone, the boss who ruled Chicago and made his name synonymous with terror and power, ended his life in a tragic way. Far from the spotlight and power. From the man who had everything to the man who had nothing. In 1939, after years of suffering, at Alcatraz, a major surprise, a prisoner was released due to his deteriorating health. The syphilis he suffered from had reached an advanced stage. After his release, Capone moved to Florida, where he lived out his final days in near total isolation. The place was quiet, a stark contrast to his life filled with gangs, money, and fame. The days passed slowly, as if time had stopped. He became known more for his ramblings and disturbing memories, suffering from partial memory loss due to his illness. Far from the people who once respected and feared him, Capone became just a sick old man suffering from loneliness and torment. On January 25, 1947, at the age of 48, Capone died in Florida. The end was shocking, but it was easy to predict after years of illness and prison. The man who was once considered the most powerful figure in the world of crime ended his life quietly. There were no warnings, no heroic tales, just a sick man who died. His death affected many who witnessed the rise and fall of Capone. But even in death, Capone's legacy lived on. In American gangster culture, his name continued to echo. He became a symbol of power and control, but also a symbol of the inevitable downfall of violent systems. His influence on the world of crime was immense, inspiring countless gangs after him and shaping a new image of organized crime in America. Although he died young, his legacy remains alive. Movies and books still talk about Capone, the man who terrified everyone, the man whose life flipped from luxury and power to weakness and isolation. And so, our story for today ends. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss any of my videos. Check out this video because it's really good, and if anyone has any ideas, write them in the comments. This was your narrator, signing off. Jerry's descent into crime began innocently enough, at least, as innocent as theft can be. At just 15 years old, he started stealing food from stores to survive. What set him apart from other petty thieves was his meticulous attention to detail. Before entering a store, Jerry would scout it thoroughly, identifying surveillance cameras and testing whether they were operational. If they were, he'd find ways to disable or evade them. Once inside, he moved like a ghost, lightning fast, yet utterly silent. No alarms blared. No witnesses noticed. His early exploits weren't limited to simple shoplifting. He quickly graduated to more sophisticated schemes, targeting high-value items from chains like Radio Shack. After stealing electronics, Jerry would forge receipts so convincing that even seasoned retailers couldn't tell they were fake. These forged documents allowed him to resell stolen goods without raising suspicion. With each successful operation, his confidence soared, and so did his ambition. It wasn't long before Jerry realized that bigger risks yielded bigger rewards. One fateful night in March 1997, Jerry executed what would become his first major heist. Partnering with a friend, he rented a transport truck, disabled the alarms at a Radio Shack warehouse, and emptied it of all its inventory. The loot was worth thousands of dollars, and Jerry celebrated his victory with pride. But his triumph was short-lived. Just days later, SWAT teams stormed his house, arresting him for the robbery. Despite being caught red-handed, Jerry managed to pull off an incredible escape during interrogation, a preview of the cunning tactics he'd employed throughout his criminal career. Jerry's ability to outwit authorities became legendary. During one arrest, he hid on the ceiling of a police station, evading detection for hours before sneaking out undetected. Another time, handcuffed and left alone in a patrol car, he freed himself using sheer flexibility and drove off in the vehicle. Each narrow escape only emboldened him further, pushing him toward increasingly daring crimes. After serving a 7-year sentence for various offenses, Jerry was deported to Canada in 1997 due to his Canadian origins. Far from deterred, he saw this as an opportunity to reinvent himself. Settling in Winnipeg, he resumed his criminal activities almost immediately. Using forged IDs and aliases, he reportedly used over 22 different names. Jerry orchestrated a series of bank robberies across Canada. His methods were nothing short of ingenious. For instance, in 2006, he targeted a newly constructed CIBC bank branch before it officially opened. Knowing the building lacked security personnel and alarm systems, Jerry entered through its ventilation system, disabled motion detectors remotely, and extracted cash trays from a T-Mizol without triggering a single alert. A staggering $750,000. But Jerry's ego proved to be his Achilles heel. A suspicious vehicle parked near Walmart opposite the targeted bank drew investigators' attention. Night guards routinely checked license plates in the parking lot to identify abandoned cars, and one such check revealed a rental car registered under Gerald Blanchard's name. Though initially dismissed as circumstantial, this clue provided authorities with their first lead. Meanwhile, Jerry compounded his errors by contacting the bank manager anonymously, claiming knowledge of the robbery and warning of a second armed attempt. While intended to mislead authorities, this call inadvertently highlighted his involvement, narrowing the net around him. If there's one crime that defines Jerry's legacy, it's the theft of Empress Elizabeth's diamond star from Vienna's Schönbrunn Palace. In 1998, while touring Europe with his then-wife, Ramona Boss, Jerry visited the CC Museum, where the priceless artifact was displayed. Captivated by its beauty and historical significance, he decided to steal it not for profit, but as leverage, should he ever face arrest. Over several visits, Jerry meticulously studied the palace's security protocols, guard rotations, and potential entry points. On the night of the theft, he infiltrated the highly secure premises undetected, replacing the original star with a flawless replica. For weeks, Schönbrunn officials remained oblivious to the theft. Only upon closer inspection during routine maintenance did they discover the deception. An internal investigation ensued, reviewing surveillance footage and visitor logs. Yet, Jerry's expertise rendered their efforts fruitless. Unbeknownst to them, he had smuggled the diamond star out of Austria and hidden it at his grandmother's house in Canada. Years passed before the truth came to light. In 2007, Ramona learned of Jerry's true identity as a wanted criminal and discovered his involvement in the theft of the diamond star. Devastated by the betrayal, she divorced him and reported his crimes to the police. Cooperation provided investigators with critical information, including Jerry's phone number, enabling them to monitor his communications. This development marked a turning point in their pursuit of justice, linking Jerry to a web of international crimes spanning continents and decades. Jerry's criminal empire extended far beyond Canada, reaching into the shadowy world of international credit card fraud and arms smuggling. Tasked by a shadowy figure known as the President, Jerry assembled a team to execute a high-stakes mission in Cairo, Egypt. Posing as veiled women to avoid detection, the group withdrew millions of dollars from ATMs using counterfeit cards embedded with real account information. However, tensions arose when Palom Cash, a member of the team, absconded with a significant portion of the loot, prompting Jerry to navigate treacherous waters as suspicions mounted among his associates. Unbeknownst to Jerry, the President's operations extended beyond credit card fraud. Investigations later revealed that he was deeply involved in arms smuggling, supplying weapons including machine guns and rocket launchers to criminal organizations worldwide. When Jerry learned of this connection, he understood the gravity of his predicament. The stakes had been raised exponentially, placing him squarely in the crosshairs of individuals who operated without moral constraints. Faced with mounting pressure, Jerry devised a plan to appease the President. He would carry out another bank heist in Canada to compensate for the stolen funds. Upon returning to Canada, he identified a newly constructed bank branch as his next target. Like previous operations, he meticulously studied its layout and security protocols, preparing to infiltrate the building through its ventilation system. However, just as he prepared to execute the plan, he noticed a suspicious vehicle parked nearby, likely belonging to secret agents monitoring the area. Sensing danger, Jerry aborted the mission, realizing that proceeding would jeopardize his safety. Despite canceling the robbery, law enforcement remained hot on Jerry's trail. Agents monitoring his communications uncovered evidence linking him to arms smuggling activities, further complicating his legal troubles. Surveillance footage and intercepted phone calls provided damning proof of his involvement in both credit card fraud and illegal arms deals. Armed with this information, authorities decided to act swiftly, raiding Jerry's home and arresting him alongside 20 others implicated in his fraudulent schemes during searches of his property. Investigators uncovered hidden rooms containing incriminating evidence, including forged documents, stolen keys, and surveillance footage documenting his crimes. Among the most startling discoveries were thousands of counterfeit credit cards, security personnel uniforms, and countless video clips capturing every aspect of his illicit activities. These recordings served as both trophies and tools for self-promotion, underscoring Jerry's narcissistic tendencies. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Jerry struck a deal with prosecutors, offering to return the Diamond Star in exchange for reduced charges. Authorities agreed, recognizing the historical significance of the artifact and its value as a cultural treasure. In addition to negotiating leniency for himself, Jerry insisted that none of his accomplices face punishment, taking full responsibility for their collective actions. While some viewed this gesture as noble, others saw it as further evidence of his manipulative nature, his final attempt to control the narrative surrounding his downfall. Jerry's sentencing marked the culmination of decades of criminal activity. Accused 16 times of theft and fraud, he received an 8-year prison term, significantly less than the life sentence initially anticipated. This outcome reflected both his cooperation with authorities and the strategic leverage provided by the Diamond Star. Yet, despite serving his sentence, Jerry struggled to break free from the cycle of crime that defined his existence. Shortly after his release in 2010, he resumed minor thefts, underscoring the difficulty of reforming patterns established over decades. Throughout his trial, Jerry maintained an air of defiance, proudly recounting his exploits without expressing remorse. He likened himself to James Bond, framing his crimes as thrilling adventures rather than morally reprehensible acts. This attitude reflects a fundamental disconnect between his perception of himself and societal norms. For Jerry, theft was not merely a means to an end, but an addiction fueled by adrenaline and ego. Even after serving his sentence, he resumed minor thefts, unable to break free from the cycle of crime that defined his existence. Ultimately, Gerald Blanchard's story serves as a mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature. His tale challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about ambition, morality, and the pursuit of success. It reminds us that while genius can unlock doors, it cannot absolve wrongdoing. True fulfillment, as Jerry's tale illustrates, lies not in evasion, but in embracing responsibility and striving for authenticity. Yet the phone call that came into the police dispatch center that day was one that no operator could ever forget. The voice on the other end of the line was frantic, trembling with panic and desperation. "You need to come now," the man screamed, his words tumbling out in a chaotic rush. "Our friend is dead. It's in his house, and there's blood everywhere." The operator tried to calm him, her voice steady as she asked for the address and details, but the man was inconsolable. "He's been missing for days. We thought something was wrong, but we didn't expect this." The call ended abruptly, leaving the operator with a sense of dread that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Police units were dispatched immediately, their sirens wailing as they tore through the quiet suburban streets. The neighborhood they arrived in was the picture of tranquility, with neatly trimmed lawns and white picket fences. It was the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen, where the biggest scandal might be a neighbor's dog digging up someone else's flower bed. But as the officers approached the house in question, they were greeted by a smell that turned their stomachs, a pungent, sickly odor that they recognized all too well. It was the smell of death, and it was coming from inside the house. Two people were waiting outside, a man and a woman, both pale and visibly shaken. The woman was clutching her phone like a lifeline. The man's hands were trembling as he tried to explain what had happened. "We broke in," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "We hadn't heard from him in weeks, and we were worried, but we didn't expect His voice trailed off, and he shook his head, unable to continue. The officers exchanged grim looks before stepping inside. The house was eerily silent, the kind of silence that pressed down on you, making it hard to breathe. The air was heavy with the stench of decomposition, and every step the officers took seemed to echo louder than it should have. The two friends led them down a hallway, their footsteps hesitant as if they were afraid of what they might see again. And then they reached the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and one of the officers pushed it open, his hand steady despite the dread pooling in his stomach. The scene that greeted them was like something out of a horror movie. Travis Alexander's body lay on the floor, partially decomposed, surrounded by a pool of dried blood. His throat had been slit so deeply that it was nearly severed, and his body was riddled with stab wounds. The blood had soaked into the carpet, leaving dark, crusted stains that spoke of a violent struggle. The room itself was in disarray, with items scattered across the floor as if there had been a desperate fight for survival. One of the officers turned away, swallowing hard to keep from gagging, while another muttered a curse under his breath. This wasn't just a murder, it was a massacre. The forensic team was called in immediately, and the house was cordoned off with the yellow tape. Outside, the two friends sat on the curb, their faces pale and their hands shaking as they tried to process what they had just seen. The detective assigned to the case arrived shortly after, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene. He was a seasoned investigator, someone who had seen his fair share of gruesome crimes, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of shock in his eyes as he stepped into the bedroom. This was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The detective nodded, taking notes as she spoke. Did he have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt him? At this, the woman's eyes widened, and she glanced at her companion before speaking. Yes, she said quickly. There's one person, Jodi Arias. She was obsessed with him. The detective's pen paused mid-sentence, and he looked up sharply. Tell me about her, he said, his tone sharp with interest. And so, the story of Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias began to unfold. Travis was a man who seemed to have it all. At 33 years old, he was charismatic, successful, and deeply rooted in his Mormon faith. But his life hadn't always been easy. Born into a troubled family, Travis and his siblings endured years of neglect and abuse. Their parents were addicts, more concerned with feeding their habits than caring for their children. The kids were often left alone for days at a time, surviving on scraps and living in filth. Despite these hardships, Travis remained optimistic. He believed that one day he would rise above his circumstances and create a better life for himself. That chance came when an elderly couple adopted him and his siblings. They provided the stability and love that Travis had never known, introducing him to their Mormon faith and encouraging him to pursue his dreams. Travis embraced his new life with enthusiasm, excelling in school and eventually graduating from college. He landed a prestigious job at a law firm, where his outgoing personality and infectious smile made him popular among his peers. He quickly became a rising star in his community, known for his generosity and unwavering faith. In 2004, his company transferred him to Arizona, a move that would change his life forever. It was there, at a company conference, that he met Jodi Arias. Jodi was stunningly beautiful, with a magnetic presence that drew people to her. She had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, and Travis was no exception. The two quickly hit it off, bonding over their shared love of adventure and their dreams for the future. But while Travis saw their relationship as a casual friendship, Jodi saw it as something much more. She became infatuated with him, convinced that he was her soulmate. At first, Travis was flattered by her attention. He enjoyed her company and admired her passion for life. But as time went on, he began to notice a darker side to her personality. Their relationship became a toxic cycle of highs and lows. Jody, desperate to win Travis's love, converted to Mormonism and began attending church with him. She hoped that by embracing his faith, she could prove her devotion and convince him to marry her. Kara, though he cared for Jody, couldn't ignore the warning signs. He knew deep down that their relationship was unhealthy, and he began to pull away. Jody, however, refused to let go. She followed him to Arizona, moving into an apartment just a few miles from his house. She showed up unannounced, called him constantly, and even hacked into his email and social media accounts. Her obsession consumed her, driving her to desperate measures. The breaking point came when Travis started seeing another woman. Jody discovered their relationship and flew into a rage. She confronted Travis, accusing him of betrayal and demanding answers. Travis, fed up with her behavior, told her it was over. He wanted nothing more to do with her, but Jody couldn't accept this. In her mind, Travis belonged to her, and if she couldn't have him, no one could. What happened next is a chilling testament to the depths of her obsession. Turned violent. Jody stabbed Travis repeatedly, slashing his throat so deeply that it nearly severed his head. She then shot him in the head, ensuring that he was dead. The brutality of the attack was shocking, even to seasoned investigators. After the murder, Jody tried to cover her tracks. She cleaned the crime scene, disposed of the murder weapon, and even took steps to create an alibi. But her efforts were in vain. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and it wasn't long before she was arrested and charged with Travis's murder. The trial that followed was a media sensation, drawing national attention and sparking heated debates about love, obsession, and justice. Jody's defense team argued that she had acted in self-defense, claiming that Travis had been abusive and that she had feared for her life. But the prosecution painted a different picture, presenting evidence of Jody's obsession and her calculated plan to kill Travis. In the end, the jury found Jody guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The story of Travis, Alexander, and Jody Arias is a tragic reminder of how love can turn into obsession, and how that obsession can lead to unspeakable violence. Travis was a man who had overcome incredible odds to build a life filled with promise and potential. He was loved by his friends and admired by his community, and his death left a void that could never be filled. Jody, on the other hand, was a woman consumed by her own desires, willing to do whatever it took to get what she wanted. Her actions not only ended Travis's life, but also destroyed her own. The case continues to fascinate and horrify, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked obsession and the devastating consequences it can have. As the years pass, the story of Travis and Jody serves as a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder of how quickly love can turn to hate, and how that hate can lead to tragedy. The phone call that started it all remains etched in the memory of those who heard it, a haunting echo of a life cut short and a love gone terribly wrong. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. In the quiet town of Leipzig, Germany, nestled within the unassuming walls of a house that appeared utterly ordinary to any passerby, a 19-year-old boy was about to embark on a journey that defied imagination. This was no ordinary adventure, but a daring and perilous plunge into the shadowy world of cybercrime. Maximilian Schmidt, a seemingly unremarkable and reserved young man, was poised to become the mastermind behind one of Germany's largest online empires for the sale of illicit substances. What he achieved was nothing short of astonishing. From the confines of his modest bedroom, he harnessed his technical prowess in the labyrinthine depths of the dark web to build a criminal network that generated millions of euros. At first glance, Maximilian's room was indistinguishable from that of any typical teenager. A bed, some posters, a few electronic gadgets scattered about. But behind this mundane facade lay the nerve center of a sprawling drug trafficking operation. Within those four walls, over 100 kilograms of illegal substances were meticulously stored. Heroin, cocaine, hashish, captagon, and even banned pharmaceuticals. Each item was carefully packaged, photographed, and listed for sale on his website, accessible to clients across the globe. These customers could discreetly place their orders, and their packages would be shipped directly to them, as seamlessly as if they were purchasing a mundane item from Amazon. But how did a teenager with no prior experience in drug trafficking manage to construct such an empire? The story begins in 2013, when Maximilian, a curious and tech-savvy young man, encountered a certain Johann online. Johann introduced him to the infamous Silk Road, the first major dark web marketplace dedicated to the sale of illegal goods. Intrigued, Maximilian downloaded the Tor browser, a tool for anonymous internet browsing, and began exploring this clandestine marketplace. What he discovered fascinated him. Thousands of illegal products, anonymous transactions conducted in Bitcoin, in a system that appeared to operate beyond the reach of law enforcement. Yet, rather than simply marveling at Silk Road's operations, Maximilian conceived an audacious idea. Why not create his own version of the site, but better? He noticed flaws in Silk Road's model: poor customer service, slow delivery times, and inflated prices. He believed he could offer a superior experience, competitive pricing, faster shipping, and impeccable service. Johann, skeptical, mocked him. "You're just a kid. You don't even know any suppliers to source these substances." But Maximilian, undeterred, resolved to prove him wrong. For weeks, he scoured the dark web in search of suppliers. Eventually, he connected with a vendor known as Red Bull, who agreed to provide him with samples of cocaine and other drugs. Maximilian paid in Bitcoin, and the products were delivered to his doorstep via mail. Remarkably, despite his deep involvement in this dangerous world, Maximilian never used drugs himself. He didn't smoke, drink, or even know much about the effects of the substances he sold. To educate himself, he turned to online research, watching videos and reading articles about the effects of cocaine, heroin, and other narcotics. With his first batch of products in hand, Maximilian began building his website. Despite having no prior experience in web development, he quickly taught himself the basics and created a platform he named Shiny Flakes. Unlike Silk Road, which operated exclusively on the dark web, Shiny Flakes was accessible via the regular internet, making it far more user-friendly for customers. Maximilian implemented a Bitcoin payment system to ensure anonymity and crafted a detailed FAQ section to address common customer queries, such as, "How will my order be delivered?" and "Is this safe?" To attract customers, he photographed his products with a professional touch. Using a simple camera and an Xbox with a reflective surface, he created images that gave his products a sleek, luxurious appeal. Customers, impressed by the quality of the photos, began flocking to the site. Within weeks, Shiny Flakes became a resounding success. Orders poured in from across Germany and soon from around the world: the United States, China, Australia, and even Colombia, a country renowned for its drug production. But Maximilian didn't stop at merely selling drugs. He revolutionized customer service in this illicit industry. Each order was meticulously packaged and accompanied by a small gift: gummy candies. This simple yet thoughtful gesture earned him glowing reviews from customers who praised not only the quality of the products, but also the attention to detail. As the months passed, Maximilian's profits skyrocketed. By January 2014, he was earning over 15,000 euros. A few months later, his daily revenue reached an astonishing 100,000 euros. Yet, he remained remarkably discreet. He continued living with his mother and stepfather, who were oblivious to his activities. He avoided flashy spending, opting instead to save his earnings and even recycle empty bottles to avoid raising suspicions. However, success of shiny flicks eventually drew the attention of law enforcement. In January 2015, a woman in Leipzig mistakenly received a package containing illegal drugs. She immediately alerted the police, who launched an investigation. By tracing packages sent from various postal centers, they eventually identified Maximilian. On February 26, 2015, a special operations unit raided his home. They discovered a chaotic room filled with boxes, papers, and over 100 kilograms of drugs. Maximilian was arrested and sentenced to 7 years in a juvenile detention center. During his trial, he cooperated fully with authorities, revealing the intricate details of his operations. However, he refused to disclose the passwords to 2 of his Bitcoin wallets, which potentially held millions of euros after serving 4 years and 7 months of his sentence. Maximilian was released in 2019. He returned to an ordinary life, working at an auto repair shop. Yet, his story remains etched in memory as a fascinating example of human ingenuity gone awry. Despite his intelligence and talent, Maximilian chose a path that, while lucrative, ultimately led to his downfall. This tale serves as a universal reminder. Quick and easy success can be alluring, but it often comes at a steep cost. True achievement is built on integrity, hard work, and strong values. Maximilian Schmidt, for all his brilliance, learned this lesson the hard way. Let's begin. September 12, 1997. Los Angeles witnessed a criminal act so extraordinary that it was later classified as the largest cash robbery in history. Precisely 12:30 a.m., a group of 6 individuals infiltrated a company specializing in the storage and transport of bank funds. This company was not a bank in the traditional sense, but a secure intermediary that safeguarded money in a heavily fortified vault. PED acted as the bridge between bank branches or as a storage facility during weekends and holidays when banks were unable to hold surplus cash. What set this robbery apart wasn't just the audacious amount stolen, but the meticulous planning and simplicity with which it was carried out. The story behind the heist remains relatively obscure, shielded by a lack of extensive media coverage, even years after the event. This secrecy stems from 2 key factors: the gang's flawless execution, which left no direct evidence of their identities, and the mastermind's unexpected profile as someone completely unsuspecting, a classic wolf in sheep's clothing. As details emerged over the years, the intricate planning, timing, and execution have been hailed as a masterclass in criminal ingenuity. While the robbery itself lasted a mere 30 minutes, its repercussions spanned decades. The robbers executed their plan, attended a party before and after the heist, and returned to their lives as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. The events of that night revealed a fascinating blend of strategy, trust, and the unforeseen vulnerabilities in what was assumed to be an impenetrable system. The seeds of this audacious crime were sown months earlier at a casual gathering in May 1997. Alan Bass, the eventual mastermind, set a party with his closest friends when he posed a seemingly lighthearted question: what if we became millionaires with a simple, easy plan? His friends, inebriated and amused, dismissed the question as a drunken jest. But Alan persisted, repeating the idea and piquing their curiosity. Someone finally asked, how, setting the stage for Alan to unveil his grand plan. What followed was a detailed outline that he had been secretly crafting. Alan revealed that the target was none other than his workplace, Denbor Armored, a company famed for its high security operations. Initially, the group's reaction was skepticism mixed with ridicule. After all, how could they possibly infiltrate a facility designed to withstand even the most determined intruders? However, as Alan elaborated on his plan, their skepticism began to wane. He presented detailed blueprints, security system layouts, and logistical strategies that highlighted vulnerabilities in the company's operations. The gravity of his proposal shifted the atmosphere in the room from dismissive laughter to serious contemplation. By the end of the night, the group agreed to reconvene and discuss the feasibility of the heist, transforming what began as a joke into a calculated plan for one of the largest robberies in history. The 6 individuals involved in the heist shared a bond forged in childhood. Their friendship was deeply rooted in years of shared experiences, loyalty, and trust. Growing up, they had formed a close-knit group that functioned like a small gang, though not for criminal purposes. They had secret rituals, their own coded language, and even a shared hideout. This unbreakable camaraderie became the foundation for their eventual criminal endeavor. While none of them had a history of serious crimes, they were united by a shared fascination with action movies, particularly those featuring icons like Bruce Lee and Sylvester Stallone. These films fueled their imaginations and inspired a sense of adventure. After high school, the group attempted to join the Navy, motivated by dreams of heroism and camaraderie. However, none of them passed the rigorous entrance exams. Instead, they found work as civilian security contractors, often assigned to guard public and private institutions under police contracts. This shared background in security work provided them with valuable insights into operational procedures and vulnerabilities, which they would later exploit during the heist. Their unique combination of trust, knowledge, and a shared goal made them a formidable team, perfectly suited for the audacious crime Allen had envisioned. Alan Bass worked as a security officer at Denver Armored, a company synonymous with high security, located in a bustling area of Los Angeles. The single-story facility was a fortress-like structure designed to store and transport large sums of cash. Banks often relied on Denver Armored to handle surplus cash during weekends and holidays when their own vaults reached capacity. As a result, the vault at Denver Armored frequently held millions of dollars at any given time. His role as a security officer gave him unparalleled access to the inner workings of the company. His responsibilities included overseeing building safety, inspecting fire extinguishers, monitoring alarms, surprising money transfers, and maintaining the surveillance system. Over time, he developed an intimate understanding of the facility's layout, security protocols, and potential weaknesses. This insider knowledge made him the ideal mastermind for the heist. Allen's position allowed him to observe patterns, identify blind spots in the security system, and devise strategies to circumvent the building's defenses. His familiarity with the staff and their routines further enhanced his ability to plan a seamless operation as he began sharing his insights with the group. They realized that the seemingly impenetrable Denver Armored had exploitable vulnerabilities, setting the stage for their ambitious plan. The preparation phase for the heist spanned 6 months, during which Allen meticulously analyzed every aspect of Denver Armored's security systems. The facility's defenses were divided into 2 main categories: external systems, monitored by the police, and internal systems controlled exclusively by the company. The external systems included cameras positioned around the building's perimeter, while the internal systems consisted of surveillance cameras and alarms within the facility. Allen's primary challenge was to find a way to bypass the external police-monitored cameras, as any breach would trigger an immediate response. To address this, he began building a rapport with the surveillance officer responsible for monitoring these cameras. Under the pretext of casual conversations during coffee breaks, Allen gathered valuable information about the system's operations and limitations. Initially, he considered recruiting the surveillance officer into the plan, but ultimately decided against it, as his friends believed the officer's weak personality made him a liability. Instead, Allen devised a plan to subtly manipulate the camera angles, creating small blind spots near the entrances. He also proposed repositioning some of the internal cameras, claiming it would improve security by eliminating existing blind spots. Management approved these changes, unwittingly aiding the gang's preparations for the heist, while the external cameras posed a significant challenge. The internal surveillance system proved to be a more manageable obstacle. Allen discovered that the internal cameras operated on a closed-circuit system exclusive to the company, with no direct connection to the police. This meant that once inside the building, the gang could disable the internal system without triggering an external alarm. Allen also identified specific pathways through the facility where the gang could move without being recorded. To further minimize risks, he made subtle adjustments to the internal camera's angles under the guise of improving their coverage. These changes created a clear route for the gang to navigate the building undetected. Another critical aspect of the plan involved duplicating all necessary keys, including those for the vault, surveillance room, and main entrances. Allen's position as a trusted employee allowed him to access these keys without arousing suspicion. With every detail meticulously planned, the group felt confident in their ability to execute the heist. Allen's intimate knowledge of the facility's security systems and his ability to manipulate them were instrumental in creating a foolproof strategy. The gang's preparations reached their final stages, and the countdown to the robbery began. As the date of the heist approached, the gang focused on fine-tuning their plan and addressing potential contingencies. They rented a large truck from a company known for its oversized vehicles, ensuring the license plates would remain obscured by the vehicle's design. This will prevent the police-monitored cameras from capturing any identifying information. To further minimize their exposure, the gang decided to execute the heist during a time when the building was least likely to be staffed. Allen's knowledge of the facility's schedule allowed them to identify the optimal window of opportunity. The plan also included measures to erase any evidence of their presence. They would disable the surveillance system, wipe the recordings, and lock up the building after completing the heist, leaving no trace of their activities. The gang rehearsed their roles and practiced their movements to ensure a smooth execution. Their preparations were so thorough that they even accounted for the possibility of being spotted by passing vehicles or pedestrians. By the time the night of the heist arrived, every detail had been meticulously planned, leaving nothing to chance. The gang was ready to carry out one of the most audacious crimes in history. The heist began in the early hours of September 12, 1997. The gang arrived at Denver armored under the cover of darkness, using the blind spots Allen had created to avoid detection by the external cameras. They quickly gained entry to the building using the duplicated keys and moved swiftly to disable the internal alarm system. Allen's adjustments to the camera angles ensured that their movements went unrecorded. Once inside, the gang made their way to the vault, where millions of dollars in cash were stored. They worked efficiently, loading the money into the rental truck with precision and speed. The entire operation lasted just 30 minutes, a testament to their meticulous planning and rehearsals. After securing the cash, they carefully erased any evidence of their presence, wiping the surveillance recordings and resetting the alarm system. They locked up the building and left the scene as if nothing had happened. The gang then returned to their respective lives, blending seamlessly back into their routines. Remarkably, they even attended a party that same night, acting as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. Their ability to maintain their composure and avoid suspicion was a testament to their discipline and preparation. The discovery of the robbery shocked the staff at Denver, armored, and law enforcement officials. The sheer scale of the theft and the lack of evidence made it one of the most challenging cases investigators had ever encountered. Despite their efforts, the police were unable to identify the perpetrators or recover the stolen money. The gang's meticulous planning and execution had left no direct leads for investigators to follow. The case quickly gained notoriety as the largest cash robbery in history, but media coverage remained surprisingly limited. The secrecy surrounding the heist was partly due to the embarrassment it caused for Denver armored and law enforcement. The company's reputation as a high-security facility had been severely undermined, and the police faced criticism for their inability to prevent or solve the crime. Over the years, details about the heist gradually emerged through documentaries and interviews with those involved. However, many aspects of the case remained shrouded in mystery, with new revelations occasionally coming to light. The gang's ability to maintain their anonymity and avoid capture has become a legendary tale of criminal ingenuity. The Denver armored heist remains a fascinating case study in the world of crime. It highlights the vulnerabilities in even the most secure systems and the lengths to which individuals can go to exploit them. The gang's ability to execute such a complex plan without leaving any evidence of their identities has earned them a place in the annals of criminal history. While their motivations and actions were undeniably criminal, their ingenuity and discipline have been acknowledged as remarkable. The story serves as a cautionary tale for security professionals and a reminder of the importance of vigilance and innovation in the face of evolving threats. For the 6 individuals involved, the heist was not just a crime, but a test of their trust, loyalty, and ingenuity. Their bond as childhood friends and their shared experiences provided the foundation for their success. As new details continue to emerge, the Denver armored heist remains a compelling narrative of ambition, strategy, and the human capacity for both creativity and deception. It is a story that will undoubtedly continue to captivate and intrigue for generations to come. City of Los Angeles glimmered like a jewel under the California sun, a place where dreams were made and broken in equal measure. It was a city of contrast as luxury sports cars zoomed past homeless encampments, and the mansions of Hollywood elites stood just miles away from struggling neighborhoods. In this world of glitz and glamour, where fame was the ultimate currency, a group of teenagers dared to dream bigger than most. But their dreams weren't of red carpets or Oscar awards. They were of fast money, stolen treasures, and the thrill of outsmarting the rich and famous. At the center of this story was Nicholas Prugo, a young man with a fragile ego and a burning desire to be someone important. Born and raised in the San Fernando Valley, Nicholas grew up in the shadow of Hollywood's towering success. He wasn't rich, he wasn't particularly confident, and he certainly wasn't famous. But he had one thing, an unshakable belief that he was destined for greatness. Nicholas's journey into the world of crime began innocently enough. He met Rachel Lee, a girl who was everything he wasn't: confident, charismatic, and fearless. Rachel had an obsession with celebrities and their lavish lifestyles, and she introduced Nicholas to a world he had only seen from afar. Together, they started small, stealing from unlocked cars in the upscale neighborhoods of Calabasas. It was almost too easy. People in these areas were so trusting, so careless, that they often left their cars unlocked with valuables inside. Nicholas and Rachel would drive around at night, scouting for opportunities. One night, they stumbled upon a brand new Porsche with the keys still in the ignition. The car was worth $75,000, and Rachel saw it as a sign. She turned to Nicholas and said, "This is our chance. Let's take it." Nicholas hesitated. Fear of getting caught gnawed at him, but Rachel's confidence was infectious. She assured him that they wouldn't get caught, and against his better judgment, Nicholas agreed. They drove off in the stolen Porsche, their hearts racing with adrenaline. To avoid detection, they swapped the license plates with those of a similar car, a trick they had learned from watching crime shows. For the next year, Nicholas and Rachel continued their spree, stealing cars and valuables from unsuspecting victims. But as their confidence grew, so did their ambitions. They wanted more and more money, more excitement, more recognition. Their first big break came when they targeted the home of a YouTuber named Eden Sassoon. Eden had posted on MySpace about traveling for 11 days, leaving his home unattended. Nicholas and Rachel saw this as the perfect opportunity. Using the information Eden had shared online, they located his address and scouted the area. On the night of the robbery, they found the back door unlocked, the stroke of luck that felt almost too good to be true. Inside, they found $3,000 in cash and other valuables. It was their biggest haul yet, and it fueled their desire for more. But this was just the beginning. Nicholas and Rachel soon realized that the internet was a goldmine of information. Celebrities and influencers often shared details about their lives online, from their travel plans to the layout of their homes. This made them easy targets. Their next victim was Paris Hilton, the heiress and reality TV star. Paris had posted a photo on Instagram wearing a $4 million diamond ring, and Nicholas and Rachel knew they had to act fast. They spent weeks monitoring her movements, studying her routines, and planning their heist. When the time came, they executed their plan with military precision. Disguised as police officers, they entered Paris's apartment, tied her up, and made off with millions of dollars worth of jewelry. The Paris Hilton robbery was a turning point for Nicholas and Rachel. It catapulted them into the big leagues, but it also put them on the radar of law enforcement. The police launched a massive investigation, and Nicholas knew they had to be more careful. But the thrill of the heist was addictive, and they couldn't stop. They continued to target celebrities, using the same methods, scouting their targets online, studying their routines, and striking when the time was right. Each robbery was more daring than the last, and each time they walked away with more loot. But as their crimes grew bolder, so did the risks. Nicholas began to feel the pressure. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, paranoid that the police were closing in. Rachel, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. She thrived on the adrenaline, the rush of outsmarting the rich and famous. Their dynamic began to shift, and cracks started to form in their partnership. Nicholas wanted to slow down, but Rachel was hungry for more. Their next target was actress Adrienne Patridge. Adrienne had posted about attending the Oscars, leaving her home empty. Nicholas and Rachel saw this as another golden opportunity. They broke into her mansion, stealing designer clothes, jewelry, and cash. But this time, they were caught on camera. The surveillance footage was grainy, but it was enough to put the police on their trail. Nicholas knew they were playing a dangerous game, but he couldn't bring himself to stop. The final straw came when they targeted Lindsay Lohan. Lindsay was one of the most famous actresses in the world. In her home was a treasure trove of valuables. Nicholas and Rachel, along with a new accomplice named Diana Tamayo, broke into Lindsay's house and made off with a fortune in stolen goods. But this time, the police were ready. They had been tracking Nicholas and Rachel for months, and they were closing in. Nicholas's world began to unravel. His accomplices turned on each other, and the police were hot on his trail. He knew it was only a matter of time before he was caught. But even as the walls closed in, Nicholas couldn't shake the feeling that he was destined for something greater. He had started this journey as a nobody, but now he was one of the most wanted criminals in Los Angeles. For Nicholas, that was a kind of fame, Jess, not the kind he had imagined. The story of Nicholas Prugo and Rachel Lee wasn't just about theft, it was about ambition, obsession, and the intoxicating allure of fame. By 2009, their gang, which would later be dubbed the Bling Ring by the media, had become a well-oiled machine. They weren't just stealing from celebrities, they were living like them. Designer clothes, luxury handbags, and expensive jewelry became their everyday attire. They flaunted their stolen goods on social media, posting pictures of themselves, draped in Chanel, Gucci, and Louis Vuitton. To the outside world, they looked like young, successful socialites living the high life. But behind the glitz and glamour was a dangerous game of cat and mouse with the law. Nicholas and Cleese and Rachel's partnership was the backbone of the bling ring. Nicholas was the brains of the operation, meticulously planning each heist and studying their target's every move. Rachel, on the other hand, was the fearless leader, the one who pushed them to take bigger risks. Together, they were unstoppable. But as their fame grew, so did their egos. Nicholas began to see himself as a mastermind, a criminal genius who could outsmart anyone. Rachel, meanwhile, became increasingly reckless, convinced that they were invincible. Their next target was Orlando Bloom, the British heartthrob, known for his roles in Pirates of the Caribbean and The Lord of the Rings. Orlando's home was a fortress with high walls and state-of-the-art security systems. But Nicholas had done his homework. He knew that Orlando was out of town. He knew, and he had studied the layout of the property using Google Maps. On the night of the heist, Nicholas, Rachel, and their new accomplice, Diana Tamayo, arrived at Orlando's mansion dressed in all black, their faces covered with scarves. They scaled the fence and made their way to the backyard, where they found an unlocked glass door. It was almost too easy. Inside the house was a treasure trove of luxury. Designer clothes hung in the closets, Rolex watches gleamed in the drawers, and stacks of cash were scattered throughout the rooms. Nicholas and his crew moved quickly, filling their bags with as much loot as they could carry. But as they were leaving, Nicholas noticed something that made his blood run cold. Surveillance camera pointed directly at them. He knew they had been caught on tape, but there was no time to worry about it now. They fled the scene, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The next morning, Orlando returned home to find his house ransacked. The police were called, and the surveillance footage was reviewed. The images were blurry, but they clearly showed three figures entering and leaving the property. The media quickly picked up the story, and the bling ring was thrust into the spotlight. For Nicholas, this was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, he loved the attention. For the first time in his life, he felt important. On the other hand, he knew that the police were closing in. As the pressure mounted, cracks began to form in the bling ring. Nicholas and Rachel's relationship grew tense, with each blaming the other for their close calls with the law. Diana, who had joined the group hoping for a taste of the high life, began to have second thoughts. She had never imagined that things would get this dangerous. Meanwhile, the media frenzy surrounding the bling ring only grew. News outlets dubbed them the Hollywood Hills burglars, and their exploits became the talk of the town. But the bling ring wasn't just about Nicholas, Rachel, and Diana. There were others involved: Alexis Nyers, her sister Gabby, and their friend Tess. Alexis was a wannabe actress with dreams of fame and fortune. She had grown up in the shadow of Hollywood, surrounded by the glitz and glamour of the entertainment industry. Unlike Nicholas and Rachel, Alexis wasn't content with stealing from celebrities. She wanted to be one. Alexis's involvement with the bling ring began innocently enough. She had met Nicholas at a nightclub, and the two quickly hit it off. Nicholas, always the charmer, told her that he was a celebrity stylist and offered to help her break into the industry. Alexis was flattered and eager to impress. When Nicholas invited her to join him and Rachel on a heist, she didn't hesitate. It was her chance to live like a star, even if only for a night. But as the heists grew more daring, Alexis began to feel the weight of what they were doing. She had always dreamed of fame, but this wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. Media was painting the bling ring as a group of spoiled, entitled kids who thought they were above the law. Alexis knew that if they were caught, her dreams of becoming an actress would be over. The final straw came when the bling ring targeted Lindsay Lohan. Lindsay was one of the most famous actresses in the world, and her home was a treasure trove of valuables. Nicholas, Rachel and Diana broke into Lindsay's house and made off with a fortune in stolen goods. But this time, the police were ready. They had been tracking the bling ring for months, and they were closing in. Nicholas's world began to unravel. His accomplices turned on each other, and the police were hot on his trail. He knew it was only a matter of time before he was caught. But even as the walls closed in, Nicholas couldn't shake the feeling that he was destined for something greater. He had started this journey as a nobody, but now he was one of the most wanted criminals in Los Angeles. For Nicholas, that was a kind of fame, just not the kind he had imagined. The bling ring's reign of terror couldn't last forever. By the summer of 2009, the walls were closing in. The police had been piecing together evidence for months, and the media's relentless coverage of the burglaries had turned the group into household names. But fame, as they would soon learn, was a double-edged sword for every admiring fan who saw them as modern-day Robin Hoods. There were 10 others who viewed them as entitled criminals who needed to be brought to justice. The pressure was mounting, and the cracks within the group were beginning to show. Nicholas Prugo, once the confident mastermind, was now a bundle of nerves. He had always been the one to plan the heists, to study the targets, and to ensure that every detail was perfect. But the Lindsay Lohan robbery had shaken him. The surveillance footage from Orlando Bloom's mansion had been released to the public. While the images were blurry, Nicholas knew it was only a matter of time before someone recognized him. He began to distance himself from Rachel Lee, the fearless leader who had once been his closest ally. Rachel, however, seemed unfazed. She was still riding the high of their success, convinced that they were untouchable. The turning point came when Alexis Nyers, one of the newer members of the Bling Ring, decided she had had enough. Alexis had joined the group hoping for a taste of the high life, but the reality of their crimes had begun to weigh heavily on her conscience. She had always dreamed of fame, but this wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. The media was painting the Bling Ring as a group of spoiled, entitled kids who thought they were above the law. Alexis knew that if they were caught, her dreams of becoming an actress would be over. One night, after a particularly tense argument with Nicholas, Alexis made a decision that would change everything. She picked up the phone and called the police. In a trembling voice, she told them everything she knew about the Bling Ring, their heists, their targets, and their methods. She even gave them Nicholas's name. It was a betrayal that would send shockwaves through the group, but for Alexis, it was a desperate attempt to save herself. The police acted quickly. Armed with the information Alexis had provided, they obtained a warrant to search Nicholas's home. When they arrived, they found a treasure trove of stolen goods, designer clothes, luxury handbags, and expensive jewelry. Nicholas was arrested on the spot, his face pale with shock. He had always known that this day might come, but he had never imagined it would happen like this. As news of Nicholas's arrest spread, the rest of the Bling Ring began to panic. Rachel Lee, who had always been the most confident member of the group, was now a nervous wreck. She knew that it was only a matter of time before the police came. For her, Diana Tamayo, who had joined the group hoping for a taste of the high life, was filled with regret. She had never imagined that things would get this dangerous. The police wasted no time in rounding up the rest of the group. Rachel was arrested at her home in Las Vegas, where she had fled in a desperate attempt to escape the law. Diana was picked up at her apartment, her face streaked with tears as she was led away in handcuffs. Even Alexis, who had betrayed the group to save herself, wasn't spared. The police had found evidence linking her to the Lindsay Lohan robbery, and she was arrested alongside the others. The media frenzy surrounding the arrests was unlike anything Los Angeles had ever seen. The Bling Ring, once a group of anonymous thieves, were now the most talked about criminals in the country. News outlets scrambled to uncover every detail of their lives, from their childhoods to their motivations. The group's mugshots were splashed across the front pages of newspapers, their faces a stark contrast to the glamorous images they had once posted on social media. For Nicholas, the reality of his situation was beginning to sink in. He had always seen himself as a mastermind, a criminal genius who could outsmart anyone. But now, sitting in a jail cell, he felt like a fool. He had risked everything for a taste of fame, and now he had nothing to show for it. The only thing he had left was his pride, and even that was slipping away. The trials that followed were a media circus. Each member of the Bling Ring was charged with multiple counts of burglary, and the evidence against them was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, stolen goods, and testimonies from their accomplices painted a damning picture. Nicholas, who had once been the confident leader of the group, was now a broken man. He pleaded guilty to the charges against him, hoping that his cooperation would earn him a lighter sentence. Rachel, on the other hand, refused to back down. She maintained her innocence, claiming that she had been coerced into participating in the heists, but the evidence against her was too strong, and she was eventually convicted and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Diana, who had always been the most reluctant member of the group, received a lighter sentence of 3 years of probation and community service. Alexis, who had betrayed the group to save herself, was sentenced to 6 months in prison. But even as she served her time, she couldn't escape the media's relentless scrutiny. Her mugshot became one of the most iconic images of the Bling Ring saga, a stark reminder of the consequences of her actions. For the members of the Bling Ring, the arrests marked the end of an era. They had started out as a group of teenagers with big dreams and even bigger ambitions, but their quest for fame and fortune had led them down a dark path, one that ended in betrayal, arrests, and shattered dreams. The fall of the Bling Ring was as dramatic as its rise. By the time the dust settled, the group that had once been the talk of Hollywood was now a cautionary tale. The media, which had once glorified their exploits, now painted them as entitled criminals who had gotten what they deserved. But for the members of the Bling Ring, the aftermath of their arrests was a time of reflection, regret, and, for some, redemption. Nicholas Prugo, the self-proclaimed mastermind of the group, was the first to face the consequences of his actions. After pleading guilty to multiple counts of burglary, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. But for Nicholas, the hardest part wasn't the time behind bars, it was the realization that he had thrown away his life for nothing. He had always dreamed of fame, but now he was infamous, his name forever associated with crime and betrayal. In prison,